If you were a ancient Roman and you saw this building, what do you suppose you would think of it? You would think it was a place to take a bath. All over the city of Rome were buildings similar to this one, almost on every other street corner, where common folks could go in and bathe. So it's a very simple structure. It was a building built in the 5th century, and it was built by the Roman Emperor Theodosius, who is, most of you know, by this time, the Roman Empire is divided into two places, the eastern and the western realm of the empire. The western realm is in deep trouble because of the invading hordes of Ostrogoths and Huns and Visigoths, what have you. So they moved the center of the administration of Rome up to, and Constantine did this first, Roman Emperor Constantine, who moved his power base to Constantinople, actually Byzantium, and he changed the name of the place to Constantinople, of course. And the western realm was ruled in Ravenna, Italy. If any of you have ever been to Ravenna, you know what a wonderful town it is, city it is, because of the incredible Byzantine mosaics that you'll see there. Well, that's what's so wonderful about this structure here. When you walk in to this building, you get to see something that is absolutely astonishing. It's like walking into a jewelry box. You see mosaics all over the walls. The whole wall, including the dome and the ceiling, are embedded with mosaics. Now, you all know what mosaics are. You know, the ancient Romans did mosaics primarily for the floors, and then they would do paintings, frescoes for their wall decoration. But mosaics were, during this early Christian period, were brought up off the floor to decorate the walls, and for good reason. You can't mistake a mosaic for a natural looking form, because if you get close to them, all they are tiny little pieces of tile and glass and embedded with a gold leaf. It reflects light. So why? Why did that happen? Well, of course, if you were a good Christian, you were admonished to stay away from the worship of idols, and naturalism became not very important. We were told not to spend too much time admiring our own bodies or others' bodies. We were told that the real pleasure in life is to be found not in this life, but the next life. So you're walking into visions of heaven when you walk into a Byzantine or a early Roman, Christianized Roman structure. This building is today referred to as the mausoleum of Galla Placidia. She was the sister of the son of Theodosius, who had two sons, really had three. One died in a battle, but one son inherited the administration in Ravenna. His name was Honorius, and the other one had Constantinople. This building originally was built to honor St. Lawrence. You may wonder why I chose to tell you this. If you know anything about St. Lawrence, you know he was martyred by being barbecued. And the Romans, soldiers who came to arrest him, said, "We'll be here tomorrow, and you better have the treasury of the church, or you'll be arrested." He said, "Well, you come tomorrow, and I'll have the treasury of the church." They came the next day, and he had all the paupers, all the poor people, indigent people, and didn't have the gold and silver and what have you. But in this mosaic, as you can see, it's a cabinet on your left that is books. was that the treasury of St. Lawrence books? But at any rate, that's not what I want to show you. This is what I want to show you. This is the so-called mosaic entitled the Good Shepherd Mosaic in the mausoleum of Galla Placidia. I think I mentioned Galla Placidia was the sister of Honorius, and she, after he passed away, she took control, and for a few years was sort of the regent of the realm, of the Western realm. Now, what I want to call your attention to is what you're looking at in terms of illusionism, naturalism. If you'll notice, the Good Shepherd, of course, is a figure of Christ in the center. And as you can see, he's wearing a halo. He has no beard. He's wearing a toga, and a purple toga at that, so that tells you he's royalty, like a Roman emperor. And his body is twisted in sort of a contrapposto pose. And now that's typical of classical art. That's classicism, naturalism. But you'll also notice that he casts a shadow, and the sheep around him cast a shadow. And one thing that was discovered was one art historian, or someone who was trying to figure this representation out, noticed all these strange looking shapes in the foreground. What were those? What are those? And he came up with a proposal that these were candle holders. So that it would be a scene that you would actually see if you went into this place, or outside it perhaps, at night. And it was a scene where someone was reenacting the idea of Christ as a good shepherd with real sheep. So is this a tableau, an actual scene that was seen by people and then reproduced here? Now, I call your attention to this because this is something that we'll lose. We're going to lose. This is the last vestige of Greco-Roman naturalism occurring, because this is going to disappear. And you know what's going to take its place is stuff like this. These are called icons. And this particular icon is one that you can see in Cortona, which is where those of you who are traveling will be staying. And it's an icon of St. Margaret. Now, St. Margaret was I think, a 15th century saint who came to Cortona and did some good works. You can actually see her. She's still there, although entombed in a church up on top of the hill. And she's visible. She doesn't look so good today, but she's still out. And but this is a wonderful icon you can see in Cortona. And as you can see, what has transpired is the move away from naturalism to an iconic simplification. And the idea of telling a story. How do you tell a story about these people? Remember, most of the people who were living in the early 13th and 14th century couldn't read and write anyhow. So you told it by telling cartoon stories. And all around this icon, this is a painting using tempera on wood, are scenes from the life of St. Margaret of Cortona. Now, wow. This is a wooden panel, 10 feet high, with gold leaf. You can see it in the Uffizi in Florence. And it's in a room where there are 4 other large altarpieces. And when you go there, please notice something. This particular one is the earlier one, and it was done by the leading Tuscan painter from Florence of the age. His name was Cimabue. Cimabue was an icon painter, a Greek in the Greek style. And there are hundreds of years of this going on throughout the Christian world. And then look at this one. Wow. Now, at first you may say, well, what's the big deal? What's the difference? This is an icon painting by one of his students. And this person, as students will do, outshone their professors. And that's the role of a good teacher, to produce students who are better than they are, isn't it? This is a painting by Giotto di Bondone. Now, Giotto is, Nana will tell you, and Dante will tell you, outshone his teacher, Cimabue. And why? What happened? This is a transformational artist. They come every once in a while. This one came like 400, 500 years after the fall of the Greco-Roman world and ushered in what we call the Renaissance. And what he ushered in will not change until Picasso. And that is, how do you represent things on a two-dimensional surface that look three-dimensional? And if you look at this Madonna and Christ child, unlike Cimabue's, let me back up. As you can see, it's flat. There's no concern for light, really. There's no concern for a natural rendition. But look at what Giotto has done. He gives us a woman that looked like someone who lived in the neighborhood. You can see contours of her body under the drapery. You can look at the expression on her face. You can look at the shadow she casts in this sort of niche. So what Giotto has done is he's given us a new sense of reality. Now remember, these are people who grew up thinking and looking at art and not thinking about reality. They're thinking about the heavenly world. That's what they're mostly interested in. Icons did some really weird things during the invasion by the Ottoman Turks. When they took the fortress at Rhodes, that were being ruled by the Knights of St. John, in a major battle at the fortress there on the island of Rhodes, the Ilyars, the crazy mercenary soldiers working for the Turkish army, had breached the walls of the fortress of the Knights. They later became known as the Knights of Malta. And in the heat of battle, the Knights of Malta, fearing for their lives, knowing they were about to lose the battle, pulled out all of their icons and banners with images on them and started parading them in front of the invading soldiers. And the invading soldiers had never seen any kind of image like this. Had never seen realistic images. They didn't know what these were. They thought they were ghosts, spirits coming at them. It was against their religious beliefs to create images. So icons work miracles. Often at battles, they would hang icons on the battlements of the fortress to help succeed in battle. But Giotto gives us something really quite amazing, and a revolution in the representation of art. Now, before I talk more about that, I would like first to talk a little bit about something else. And what contributed to what we think of as the Renaissance? How do you explain what happened in the Renaissance? Well, lots of things happened. Number one, trade. Trade with the East. The Crusades happened. These were people who went to the East. They weren't there to shake hands. But they came back with new ideas about the East. As you know, a lot of Europeans and even nobility lived in the East at this time, had private sort of enclaves of their own power in eastern places along the coast of the Mediterranean and what is today Israel and Syria in North Africa. But another ingredient that's very important, not only with trade, but also the rise in Europe of a merchant class, a wealthy class of people who did not inherit great wealth, but made wealth in the trade, in trading, especially cloth from the East, and competition. You get great art when you get competition. I've often told students that inner shows, you've got to do that. You've got to win some prizes. Competition is good. And lo and behold, in Italy, of course, when artists like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, Raphael, and those guys started gaining a reputation, it was because they were winning commissions. They were paid to do things. Sometimes they were paid up front before they even had the work of art even sketched out. So this was another major new innovation. And certainly, finally, the status of the artist. They started signing their work. Individualized styles began to emerge in art. Here before, the artist was nothing other than a craftsman. All they did was kind of create things. You don't see signatures much on their works. Another aspect of Renaissance art can be discovered here. By the way, this is a Cimabue painting. You can see it in Assisi. It's a painting of St. Francis. I'm sure most of you all have already recognized that. And St. Francis was an outlier. He did not belong to the Renaissance. He was a medieval saint. But I must tell you, it is my belief he had a lot to do with the Renaissance, and I'll try to explain why. The word is often tossed about, and the word is humanism. What is humanism? What does that mean? It has its origin in, of course, Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, the Stoicism of Marcus Aurelius. If you've read Greenblatt's book, The Swerve, you know that a little secretary for one of the popes had lost his job, and he was out looking for manuscripts because a good number of wealthy aristocrats were collecting ancient manuscripts, and he found one in Germany, a poem, a long poem by the great Roman poet, a man named Lucretius, who was a protege, you might say, of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. And what Lucretius did was he translated the Greek Epicurean philosophy into a vernacular Italian in the 14th century, which presented a world open to investigation that emphasized the human search for pleasure in a dignified manner. Most of us have a different interpretation of what it means to be an Epicurean. We think of the ancient Romans who would have these orgies and eat and drink too much and have a gurgatorium where they could go and cleanse their body and come back and eat more. That is not what Epicureanism is. Trust me, it's quite different. Now, the Romans may disagree, but Lucretius was a follower of the belief that, like Epicurus, that all things are in progress. All things change. He believed all things were atoms, where we get the word atom. Everything can be reduced down to simple things. And they can break free from their bonds to form, or you could say to swerve, and make other things. A religion of progression. In other words, there are no absolutes, and all things can and should be investigated, questioned. The supreme good is the absence of pain. The highest aim of human aspiration is friendship. To lead a withdrawn and quiet, virtuous life, not a medieval dogmatic existence in which one should be straitjacketed to religious or political dogma. Man has a free will. Lucretius' poem on the nature of things influenced our thinking in this country. It influenced Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had in his library 3 volumes of Lucretius' poem. Lafayette, The Rights of Man, quotes from it come straight from Lucretius on the nature of things. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness entered into our lexicon of the Constitution. So there you have it. So why do I bring up Francis, who didn't agree with any of this stuff? Francis, as I said, was an outlier. But he added something else to our concept of the Renaissance. And it was a kind of humanism, but I guess what you would say today would be a very severe form of humanism. I'd call it a severe servant leadership program. His life is unbelievable. I was lucky to once, my first trip to Italy, I got to go to Assisi and went to the crypt of St. Francis. And while I was there, I was lucky to be there the day that an American priest was giving a little talk about St. Francis at his crypt. You can go there where he's buried today in the Basilica of San Francesco. And you can sit and listen to whatever priest happens to be in town. They'll be down there talking almost all the time. And I loved being in Assisi. I walked around and I said, well, here I am in Assisi and all I see is tourists. All I see are tourist attractions and these horrible gift shops. St. Francis, believe me, if he saw what was going on in his hometown, he would need to go to the LaGrange Auditorium. He hated the idea of commercialism, especially in his name. I'll tell you more about him. But I was looking when I was there for a place that perhaps you could find something that was sincere instead of these reproductions of the tile cross that he created, that he enjoyed. I was looking for someone who did woodworking and maybe instead of these things that were made in China or Indonesia, wherever all these trinkets that were related to St. Francis came from. And I found this little man in a wood shop, and I went in and met him, and he did these beautiful wooden crosses and things, and I got to meet him. And then I was back in Assisi 10 years later. This was probably 10 years ago. And I'm back in Assisi, and I said, I wonder if he's still here, because all of the old wood shops, craft shops were closed. Only these modern places, 3D visions of St. Francis, etc., cards of St. Francis. So if you turn it at a sideways, his eyes blink at you. It's just the most absurd thing. And I went back, and guess what? He was still there. And I asked him if I could buy one of his crosses. Still have it. He wasn't there the last time I was there. The last time I was there, it was late one afternoon. I should tell you, I I became completely fascinated. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not all that religious. I was raised a Methodist. But I must tell you, I got really fascinated with this man. So I came back, I read everything I could read about him, and I decided I wanted to go to all the places he went. The man walked everywhere. And so I applied for a grant. The college gave me a summer grant to go follow in the footsteps of St. Francis. So I went and photographed. I produced a body of work that I've exhibited. I can't remember how long ago that was, but a few years ago I had an exhibit of my photographs. And the last time I was there, I was on that same excursion looking for sites related to St. Francis, and we arrived in Assisi, and I said, well, we can't pass by Assisi. The guy I was traveling with, I made him pull in. We found a cheap hotel, but the light was unbelievable. Fog. And I said, I've got to get down to the basilica to see it in this light. So I ran down the streets before the sun went away completely and found this photograph. And I just think it was a real experience. And what I noticed too, they had put out in front this bronze statue of St. Francis on a horse. And most people, when they think of St. Francis, they don't think of him this way. I mean, it reminds you of James Earl Frazier's The End of the Trail or something. But it is a wonderful representation of Francis, because as a young man, this man had aspirations for greatness. He was born in Assisi, and his father was a cloth merchant. His father's name was Pietro di Bernardoni. And his father primarily traveled to France to buy cloth that he would come back to Assisi to sell. And he often took young Francis with him. Actually, his father was away when Francis was born, and his mother had him christened Giovanni. His real name is Giovanni, John. Y'all going to think eventually that I'm making all this up, but Francis came back home and said, wait a minute, I wanted to name my son Francesco, which means the Frenchman in Italian. And so I don't know if he ever changed his name or not, but if you go look up the records, don't look under Francesco, look under Giovanni. But at any rate, Francis stuck. That's how we call him today. And as a young man, he was a rowdy guy. He was the son of a wealthy merchant in Assisi. He was always with a band of compatriots who were playing in the streets, creating havoc, getting in trouble. His father would bail him out. Finally, something bad happened. The people from Perugia, some of which were the nobility from Assisi, had been kicked out of the town for political reasons. They decided to form an alliance with the Perusians and invade Assisi, and a battle ensued. And Francis convinced his father to outfit him with a horse and armor and go into battle. Francis didn't do so well. His friends were killed, many of them. He was taken prisoner. He was put in a dungeon in Perugia as a young man, probably 19. Now, he was in a dungeon for a year. That will change your life, won't it? You don't know whether you're going to get out of this or not. And he came down with malaria while he was in the dungeon. His father, the reason he survived the battle was because he was so well attired. And everybody said, here's a guy that we can use for ransom. We'll make money off this guy. So they didn't kill him. And his father, and I guess the people from Assisi, raised the money to free him. And he comes home. What's he going to do now? Well, at first he hears there's a crusade going on and a Norman knight is passing through. So he joins this Norman knight, again gets outfitted with armor and a horse, which was not cheap, by the way, mail and all that. but gets as far as Spoleto and comes down with the malaria reoccurs. He sells the horse, sells his clothes, and walks back to Assisi. Walking back to Assisi, feeling worthless at this stage, he enters into as you climb up the hill at Assisi, there's a beautiful little chapel really, called San Damiano. It was in ruin. So he goes in, he ducks in there and to get away from the heat, and he sees a cross on the wall, an ancient Byzantine cross, Greek style. And lo and behold, he described the cross talking to him, telling him, "Francis, rebuild my church." So his mission now is to take whatever money he can steal from his father and buy stones to help rebuilding this church. Now, the way to tell the story of St. Francis is to go inside the basilica. And as you all know, it's full of the beautiful frescoes by Giotto, or we think. We're wrong. Cimabue received the commission to do the paintings based on the life of St. Francis here. But he entrusted his young student, Giotto, with the job. He left and went other places. Now, Giotto was 21 years of age. He had excelled. By the way, Cimabue found him out in the country when he was a 10-year-old kid drawing. He was a shepherd outside of Tuscany, outside of Florence, and he was drawing sheep with stone on a piece of stone. He was scratching, engraving a stone of a sheep. And Cimabue thought he was such a good artist, he said, he went to his father and said, "You need to send him to my studio." So Giotto grew up in Cimabue's studio, and at age 20, he's brought here to Assisi. St. Francis is dead. They've built this church. He's been made a saint, and they're looking to have it decorated with scenes of the life of St. Francis. So this is a good place to study the life of St. Francis. This is what we're going to do now. Although Giotto probably did the designs, whether he actually did much of the painting is questionable, because there's a variety of hands that art historians have found in the paintings. One of the first panels you'll see here is Francis giving away his clothing, which he had lots of. And here, this is a wonderful scene, a fresco of Francis. And by the way, these are quite large, as you can see from the first slide I showed. The next thing Francis does is his father is upset with him, says, what are you doing, son, going around giving away your clothes, selling your clothes to buy stones to build an old derelict church halfway down to the valley? And Francis, his father, has him arrested, beats him up, puts him in a prison inside his own home. His father goes out of town, and his mother, Pica, who we think was French, who sang French songs to him as a young kid, because Francis would often burst into French songs from time to time. His mother let him out of the cell that he was kept in, and he runs down to San Damiano and hides out. His father comes, has him arrested again, and he then goes and petitions the Bishop of Assisi for a case to settle what his father is suing his son, what he owes him. So here's a panel depicting Francis in front of the bishop's palace with witnesses appearing before his father. And he's telling his father, and he's telling the group of people there, that my father today is God the Father in heaven. You are no longer my father. He's renouncing his father. His father wants to smite him. As you can see, one guy is trying to hold back his hand to keep his father from hitting him. If I can get it right here. And Francis is now pointing to heaven, and the hand of God is up here in the sky. And the bishop, I didn't mention the fact that Francis, before he came out to tell this, went inside and took his clothes off, came out naked, and threw all of his clothes at his father, and now his father has gathered them up, has them in his arm, and threw a purse of coins that he owed his father for the sale of the stones, and says, I no longer acknowledge you as my father. Francis then becomes a pauper. He renounces all worldly goods. He dresses in a sackcloth, leather belt, and sandals, and goes around begging for food and money to build a church, San Damiano. People began noticing this guy, and finally other men in the community began to join with him and announce their worldly goods, including women. A famous woman, Claire, a young beauty in Assisi, joins, is one of his followers as well. So much so that he now has 12 followers, and he goes to Rome to petition Pope Innocent III. If you're Pope, you get to name yourself anything you want to. I can't think of anything better than being called Pope Innocent. That's what I would name myself if I were Pope. And he goes to the Pope, and guess what? The Pope is asleep. He didn't want to see him right away. Francis stands outside the church, St. John Lateran, and acts like a beggar. And everybody, the Pope's assistants are coming to him saying, wait, there's this crazy guy out here wanting to see you. And he said, I don't want to see this guy. And well, he has a dream one night that Francis is holding up the church. Now, this panel bothers the heck out of me, because if you're going to hold up the church, you don't stand on the platform of the church, do you? And the Pope eventually accedes and grants him the right to form an order. It bothered the Pope because Francis said, I want an order that will own nothing. We do not collect alms. We do not, all we want to do is rebuild churches, and we will even beg for our food. We don't need a house. We don't need anything. Well, of course, he eventually is given San Damiano, where he puts Claire, one of the female followers, which is now still to this day considered to be the convent of the Poor Clares. And here it is. This is San Damiano, the way it looks today. And that window right there is the entry into her room. This is the cloister of it. It's a beautiful church. And if you ever in Assisi and you have the time, walk about halfway down the hill and you can see it. And this is the cross that was inside the chapel at San Damiano that spoke to Francis. It's a Byzantine cross. And of course, we all know, on his way back from Rome, some of his brothers noticed that the birds were congregating under his feet and they weren't flying away. And here he is giving them a little sermon. Now, I mentioned I traveled all over the place following in his footsteps, and this is one of the places I went, San Leo. This is a beautiful hill town with a castle. When Francis was there, a wedding was taking place, and that's probably why he went, because he knew there'd be a group of people. So in this courtyard here, the Piazza Dante, he stood on this wall over here on the left and began preaching to a bunch of people. And a man, a nobleman, came up to him and said, I need to save my soul, and I want to give you a mountain that I own. Will that ensure that I can have salvation? And Francis said, well, I can't own anything, but I'll use your mountain. And he was given here a mountainside called La Verna. Remember that. I'll talk about it in a moment. Because it was at La Verna, when he went there, that he received the stigmata. Now, y'all know what that means. He went on a fast, went up to this mountain, and huddled between rocks, he began praying. Nothing but bread and water for 4 weeks, a month. He wouldn't even speak to his other brothers. And when they found him after 4 weeks, he had the signs of the wounds of Christ, the stigmata, at La Verna. I had to go there. And every day, twice a day, the Franciscans march from the chapel of the stigmata from their dormitories, twice a day, to this day. And on his way home, he, after being in North Africa, trying to convert the Sultan of Egypt to Christianity, almost seeking martyrdom, he stops here in a place outside of Cortona called Les Selles, where he almost died, but one of the brothers, Elias from Cortona, wanted to keep him there. He wanted him to die there, but Francis insisted that he be returned to Assisi. But at La Verna, pilgrims go there to this day, and one of the reasons Francis explained the stigmata there was the clefts in the rock, the tearing of the rock faces there reminded him of the tearing of the veil at the crucifixion, and hence the wounds of Christ. And the pilgrims who go there scratch with their car keys crosses. And I'm not talking about a few. And the chasm that you're in here is probably as big as a stage, maybe a little larger, where he received the stigmata, and rock all the way around it like an amphitheater. And there are thousands of crosses, thousands of them. So I took my big camera out and made a photograph of it. Another place he went, and I highly recommend you go there one day if you get a chance, to a place called Ascoli. Here is a wonderful Art Nouveau cafe where you can have a nice whatever. And the church of San Francesco in the background. And guess what happened there? As you enter this church, the pilgrims tap their knuckles on the columns because they're hollow. And they say only the faithful can hear the sounds that you're made. Look at the wearing of the columns. I mean, good heavens, that's a lot of knuckles over the centuries, I guess. And then, and this is why I say he's important in terms of the Renaissance. He gets to a little village down in the Rieti Valley called Griccio. Griccio, Francis was there, and it was, I guess, at Christmas time, and he decided this would be a good time to give a sermon on the birth of Christ. Now, the birth of Christ hadn't been presented anywhere else before. Hardly ever mentioned in Byzantine mosaics and what have you. And Francis said, I'm not going to just give a sermon about the birth of Christ. I'm going to reenact the birth of Christ. So he goes out and finds people who have horses and mules and cows and sheep, and he finds a woman who's just had a baby and a manger. He builds it, and they march in through the church. He recreates the birth of Christ. In reality, he creates a little drama there for people to see in Griccio. He created the Christmas creche, you guys. That's the origin of the Christmas creche. And you can go there today, and there's a museum there where people have donated creches from every corner of the world. You walk into a museum and there's a creche from Nigeria. There's one, I mean, I don't know if Georgia has, I don't know if every state has creches, but it's a museum of creches. Unheard of. And this is in Griccio, and the tau symbol over the door means this was the place where he lived when he was there, stayed. And then I mentioned he goes during the crusade, the fifth crusade, to Demetia in northern in Egypt, in northern Egypt, and he goes in to try to convert. During a crusade where they had literally the Christian crusaders had surrounded the town, and he goes in and literally risking his life with a couple of his brothers, and is arrested, beaten up. He gets an audience with the Sultan of Egypt. Selim was his name, and he suggests that his religious advisors go through fire, and so will Francis, and we'll see whoever comes out the other side, we will convert you to our beliefs. Well, here the Sultan, as you can see, is kind of doubting whether that's a good idea or not. And here's the fire, and you can see the Sultan's religious followers are seeking the exit door. I think Francis literally wanted to seek martyrdom. But there are places you can see where he was given gifts by this man. The man was so taken by Francis's humility that he befriended him. Supposedly, he gave him passage to the Holy Land. We don't know if Francis got there. We do know that after this visit, Francis came home and was very ill and was going blind, and had to have his eyes cauterized. Can you imagine going and having somebody with hot irons put on either side of your face and bleeding your eyes sockets? Well, that was the end of Francis, really. He died at age 44, I think it was. And I mentioned the cells. This is where he lived in Cortona. You can see this place. And this is the door to his cell, which is, open every day. You can go in and see where he lived when he was there. I think I told you he ended up being taken home and to Assisi. They had to circumvent Perugia. They didn't want the Perugians to steal his body. And when he got home, when he was dying, he insisted that they put him on the ground to die outside. Crazy Horse, when he was taken by the cavalry and imprisoned, I guess in Montana or Wyoming, where when he was dying, he'd been stabbed by a cavalry soldier. He asked to be taken out and put on the ground. Now I'm going to change the subject. Enough of Francis. But do you see what I mean about humanism and St. Francis? Another artist of great note is this man. This is a wonderful painter. His name was Della Francesca, Piero della Francesca. And this is his resurrection painting, a fresco in the town of San Sepolcro. San Sepolcro means the Holy Sepulchre. Supposedly, some crusaders came to this little village, and with some stones they had brought back from the tomb of Christ, and that's how the town got its name. And so Della Francesca, a painter, decides in his life was 1417 to 1492. He was a wealthy fellow. His father was a shoemaker, and sent his young son Piero to Florence to be made a pupil of the painter Veneziano. He was familiar with Brunelleschi, Alberti. actually lived in the town. He studied with Masaccio and Fra Angelico. And this man, obviously you can look at this painting and tell, was very much interested in simplicity of geometric shape. Here's this Renaissance triangle, obviously. We think this guy here is a self-portrait of Della Francesca, this guy right here with his face showing out. You can see this in the City Hall in San Sepolcro, which is right outside of Arezzo. And next door to him lived this man. This is a guy named Paoli. Luca Paoli. Have you ever heard of him? Any of you bankers or businessmen know anything about bookkeeping? This is the man who created double entry bookkeeping. He was a great mathematician, but he was also a plagiarist, because Della Francesca has written book after book on Alberti's concepts based upon Vitruvius, the Roman architect's idea of geometric harmonies. And guess what? Della Francesca becomes a painter, puts down his books, and quits thinking so much about mathematics and proportions and all that stuff, and starts painting, except in his paintings. And then this guy, after Della Francesca passes away, takes his books and has them published and gets the credit for the books that he had written, Della Francesca's. But I show him to you just right next door. They live next door to each other. And if you go there today, his house is a museum now too, based upon all these geometric propositions that he and Della Francesca probably worked on based upon Vitruvius and Alberti, the architect. Della Francesca was asked to do portraits of these two people. This is the Duke of, his name was Federico Montefeltro, and his wife Battista. I don't know who that woman is looking at those paintings. She's looking at the back of the paintings. There are paintings on the back too, I should point out. And this is the wife. This is the Duke of Montefeltro. She was a Sforza, by the way. Her father was Ludovico Sforza in Milan. So she was from a very wealthy family. And this guy, he did not want to have his portrait painted frontally, and for good reason. He was involved, he was a mercenary, he was a soldier, but he married well, obviously. And he was in a jousting match once and got his eye gouged out. So he was not a handsome man because of that. So all the paintings of him are always sideways. And this is a painting he commissioned for his tomb. Him, wearing armor, letting you know he's a soldier. And this is the adoration of the Christ child. But is it really? No. It's really a painting about his wife who gave birth to a beautiful red-headed boy, an heir to him, but she died in childbirth. And so is this a painting in which he's praying for her salvation, where she would be ordinarily would be over here kneeling on if she was a patron of the painting, this is where she would be. And that would be her patron saint, St. John the Baptist. Her name was Battista. It's a great painting and a beautiful rendition of what you think about when you think about the science or perspective in a work of art. The place to go to really appreciate this artist is Arezzo. And there's a choir in the church of San Francesco, of course, in Arezzo, that has 14 years of his life's work, depicting the golden legend, not biblical, but the golden legend of Frenchmen, I think in the 15th century, 16th century. Nina, you probably tell me. It's stories related to biblical events, but embellished. And it's the golden legend of the discovery of the true cross. And if you go in there, let me do this for you, to give you an idea of what you're going to see here. How many of you saw the movie The English Patient? Remember that movie? It's a great film. One of my favorite films of all time. Do y'all remember the scene where the sapper takes the nurse, what was her name? Juliet Benichot, and he ties a rope around her, and he pulls her up, and she has a candle in her hand, and she's moving back and forth in front of a painting. That was the only bad thing about the movie. The reproductions of the paintings were terrible. But imagine that I've taken each one of you and put rope around you and hoisted you up on a rope, and you're swinging around, and I'm going to show you what those paintings are, okay? This is the discovery of the true cross. It begins with the death of Adam and the lunette up overhead. We see Adam dying, dead. Two things at the same time in the same painting. Obviously, time warp. Adam is now instructing his son Seth, this older gentleman here. By the way, Adam was 900 years old at the time. And Seth has been told to go down and see this angel, Michael, Archangel Michael, and get something from him. And that something is a branch from the tree of life, from the Garden of Eden. And here's Adam laid out dead. By the way, look at this pose that Adam is in. You recognize the pose with one knee up? Where have you seen that before? The creation of Adam, Michelangelo. You know, this is a typical representation of the creation of man. And Adam's got his knee up. And here he is dead, and Seth has come back and bent over. I'm sorry this slide is not very sharp. And he's placing in Adam's mouth a branch from the tree of life. And what Della Francesca is depicting here, the fresco's in pretty bad shape. You can see much of it is gone. And he shows you different ages of man, from different ages. The early people over here naked and wearing animal skins, and then all of a sudden they find clothes, get to wear. So he's showing you a little bit of the evolution of mankind there. The next scene is, guess what? The tree grows up out of the grave of Adam. And it just so happens one day, the Queen of Sheba is here. Is that her name? What was her name? The Queen of Sheba is arrived in Jerusalem to marry this guy, Solomon. And on her way into town, she passes by a footbridge made out of wood. And it was a big beam of wood that Solomon wanted to use for his temple or his palace, because he was told it was the wood from the tree of life. And he started using it, but it started growing and it didn't fit. So he had to change his mind. Then he said, well, I'll just use it for a footbridge. And so here the Queen of Sheba recognizes the wood in her wisdom, and she's now bowing before it. And you see the shadow. Notice the composition is very geometric, based upon the golden section. And then we see in the same scene, really just a column separating the two scenes. And the next scene is the Queen of Sheba. Here she is bowing, and then we see her before Solomon, and she's holding his hand. Now that meant Solomon's going to marry her. I think he had several wives, maybe 100 or two. But at any rate, here's a wonderful, touching scene of the two of them. Notice the handshake. And then the wood, the beam of wood is buried. Solomon's upset. This beam of wood is no good. It keeps growing. What am I going to do with it? He has it buried in a pool. People who bathed in that pool were cured of their illnesses. So it had curative powers. And this is Solomon's men taking it to be buried. And then along comes a man named Constantine, years later. And Constantine has a dream that an angel has brought to him in a dream. The next day he's about to meet in battle his competitor, Maxentius, at the Milvian Bridge. And Constantine is in a dream told that he will win that battle if he has the sign of the cross with him. So he literally has on the shields of all of his soldiers the Chi Rho symbol painted on them, we understand. And then he goes into battle the next day, and this fresco is in really bad shape, holding the cross, a cross. And by the way, that looks like a glass cross, doesn't it? There is a glass cross in the collection at the museum in Cortona that they claim was the one Constantine took into battle. So look for it when you're there. It's in a church. You can't. I shouldn't say it's a museum. It's in a church. It's a relic. And here, after the battle, he wins, of course, the battle. Maxentius drowns in the Tiber. And the next day, or days afterwards, Constantine sends his mother, St. Helena, to Jerusalem to find the true cross in the Golden Legend. So here's St. Helena arriving to locate the true cross. Now she finds out there's a man in town who knows where it's buried. His name was Judas. He refuses to tell her. She puts him in a well for 7 days. After 7 days, he relents, says, okay, I'll tell you. They pull him up out of the well, and he shows them where the cross was buried, and she has to dig up all 3 crosses. Which one is the true cross? Well, she takes and has them, just so happens that day, a funeral is taking place, and a dead man is being brought by. And she says, we'll pass the crosses over this dead man and see which one comes back to life. Good way to prove it. And so here she is supervising in a bowed setting the recovery of the life of this man here who's raising up, and here's the true cross. So she finds the true cross, right? So here it is. Notice the church in the background. It hadn't been built yet. This is Alberti. This is an Albertian church of the first order. And this is how important mathematics and proportion was to Della Francesca. And here she is. Here's a detail of that scene. And here's one of Alberti's churches to give you an idea of the similarity. And notice in the background this incredible painting of the city of, really that's the city of Arezzo, not Jerusalem. But at any rate, look at this. What does it remind you of? It reminds me of Picasso Cubism. So Della Francesca is a wonderful artist who is reducing forms down to basic, simple shapes, as you can see. And the last painting I'm going to show you is what happens to the church, to the cross after that. Constantine, St. Helena comes, discovers the cross, has it placed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and then a Persian king comes in a battle, takes the cross back to Persia, and it takes a Byzantine emperor to reclaim it. And so this is the battle scene of the Persians and the Byzantines, in which the cross has been, here's the cross right here. This is the Persian king's throne, and you can see a rooster over here on a column. He wanted to have the symbolism of the Holy Trinity. So you got the cross, the throne, and the rooster, this Holy Spirit, I guess. And here it's being executed by the Byzantine. And his son is this fellow here getting stabbed in the throat, and his head is directly right under the cross. I thought that was an interesting concept. But notice the love of the banners and the decoration, the way it's painted. Della Francesca subsidized his painting career by painting banners as well. And anytime you go to Italy, you're liable to see some beautiful banners. They're really good at it, especially at the Palio in Siena. Flag throwers. You see this eagle, that there it is again, see. So these artists were, what's the word, ambidextrous. They did everything. They did lots of different things. And the last painting, of course, is a Byzantine emperor has to take the cross back to Jerusalem. And here he is, had to bring it back on his shoulders, barefoot. They wouldn't let him in the gates of Jerusalem unless he was barefoot. And unfortunately, his body is pretty much missing. But here he is entering to bringing the cross back. And the last painting in this series of these walls in the choir is the Annunciation, an incredible painting based upon the golden section, as you can see here. And the way light is portrayed here in this painting is just astonishing. So when you're there, get somebody to hoist you up. And by the way, you got to put a coin in a little light machine to light it up. Remember that when you're there. But I want to show you this aspect of Della Francesca. He was a wonderful artist in terms of reducing forms down to basic shapes and creating real beautiful classical forms. And this is one of the prophets in that choir. I love the wonderful geometric shape of the scroll that he's holding. And if you look at a close-up of one of his paintings, you can see how beautifully articulated it is in sort of a classical way. An angel of Della Francesca. Picasso. You know, he went through a classical phase. You can't tell me he wasn't influenced by Della Francesca. William Bailey, a professor at Yale who used to head up the drawing and painting program at Yale, loved Della Francesca. And look at the way he would do a portrait. Another painter, real quick, I know we're running out of time. I've gone over time. Is this guy. This is a fellow named Signorelli. One thing you got to remember about the Renaissance is this love of human anatomy. All of a sudden, again, people began investigating how we operate as a machine. The body works as a machine. And you know, Da Vinci did dissections. This guy did too. He was a pupil of Della Francesca, Signorelli. He was from Cortona. He grew up in Cortona. He lived most of his life in Cortona. I was in Cortona once with Lamar Dodd. I wanted to go with him to see the paintings in the museum there of Signorelli's. You know what Lamar Dodd told me? He said, John, he couldn't paint fingers. He was a terrible painter of fingers. And I can't look at his work anymore without looking at those fingers. But on your way up from Rome, there's a little stop you could make in Orvieto. Not because of the wine that they make there, but because in the church there, beautiful Tuscan Gothic church, are Signorelli's masterworks. The End Times. And look at the anatomy here. You can't tell me. His studio is right next to a morgue, so you can understand why he got interested in anatomy. You can't tell me he didn't influence Michelangelo. He didn't influence Da Vinci. They were all contemporaries. They knew each other. And this is how the saved looked, by the way. So he did give you both versions. I'm going to finish here with a modern painter. Now, if you were an Italian living in Italy in the early 20th century, how would you feel about your country? Mussolini is about to come to power. You're sick and tired of all these American tourists coming over there looking at Michelangelo. You're sick and tired of everybody coming to Italy to look at old stuff. It'd be like everybody coming from the north down to the south to look at antebellum homes. The most radical, revolutionary group of artists that has ever lived were Italians. I think they inspired some of Mussolini's thinking. And this is one of them. His name was Gino Severini. He's also from Cortona. Severini grew up in about 1910, 1912, thereabouts, is an artist. And here's a self-portrait of Gino Severini. And what do those Italians do? They form a group, a clique of painters. They call themselves the Futurists. And they published a manifesto. They said, the speeding automobile clipping, you can imagine in 1910 and 1913, an automobile, going maximum 30 miles an hour. The speeding automobile coming down a street is far more beautiful than the winged victory of Samothrace. They recommended you take all of that old stuff and throw it in the river. It was time to move to a new time, a new period, a modern period. They called themselves the Futurists. What had a lot to do with it was the fact that many of them left there and went and moved to Paris. And when they got to Paris, who did they meet? They met Picasso. And they saw Cubism at work. Now, what is Cubism? Remember, up until Picasso and Cubism, 1906, 1907, if you were an artist, you painted a scene from a fixed point of view. Cézanne comes along and says, well, you can look at it from different points of view and paint it in the same painting. Einstein comes along and says, you can't do reality without time. And so Picasso paints a painting called Demoiselles d'Avignon, in which you have not only time in terms of perspective and viewing, you also have the idea that, in a real sense, if you were traveling at the speed of light, you would see the front and side and back of somebody at the same time. And so Cubism comes into being, and this was their answer to modernism, the Italians. And this is Severini's self-portrait again, but in a Picasso style, as you can see. And you can see they extol the notion of speed, light. Motion was very important to them. Remember, Mussolini did have the trains running on time. And I began this program with a mosaic representing naturalistic space. I'm ending it with a mosaic representing flat space. Thank you.